Captain Ethan Drake had always thought of himself as a man of duty. As a soldier in the human military, his life had been full of missions, orders, and a strong sense of responsibility. But nothing in his training had prepared him for what he was about to face. The mission had seemed simple enough. Establish a peaceful relationship with the Zirith, an ancient alien race that had recently made contact with Earth. The Zirith were known for their incredible technology and vast knowledge of the universe, but their people were also proud and distant, keeping their culture largely to themselves. It had been a year since the first meeting, and humanity was eager to build a strong alliance with them. Ethan, as part of the diplomatic team, was assigned to represent Earth in this delicate process. The city of Jalara, the capital of the Zirith Empire, stood as a symbol of their advanced civilization. Towering structures made of smooth, shining stone reached toward the sky, their surfaces glowing faintly with energy. The air was thick with the hum of alien technology, and the streets were filled with citizens from all over the galaxy. Ethan, standing in the middle of it all, couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. This was unlike anything he had ever experienced on Earth. As he walked through the grand halls of the palace, he was constantly reminded of the gravity of the situation. There were political negotiations to be made, alliances to be forged, and promises to be kept. His focus was on the task at hand, and he had little time for distractions. At least, that's what he told himself. Then he met Princess Ylira. She was unlike anyone Ethan had ever seen before. The Zirith people were tall, their skin shimmering, with a soft, silver-blue hue. But Ylira stood out even among her own. Her eyes were the color of the deepest ocean, a dark blue that seemed to hold secrets from beyond the stars. Her long, dark hair cascaded down her back in waves, and her features were sharp yet graceful, as though they had been carefully crafted by the hands of time itself. She radiated an aura of royalty, her presence demanding respect. Ylira, the heir to the Zirith throne, was both admired and feared. Her intelligence was unmatched, and her strategic mind had already secured her a place among the most influential figures in the empire. But there was something about her that made her different from other royalty. She wasn't just a leader. She was a person with a deep sense of duty to her people, someone who genuinely cared about the future of the Zirith civilization. Ethan had been warned about her. Do not let your guard down. She's as sharp as a blade, and her loyalty to her people comes before anything else. Yet, when he first laid eyes on her, he found himself mesmerized by her quiet strength. It was as if her gaze could see right through him, making him feel both exposed and intrigued. Their first meeting took place in a grand hall, where dignitaries from various planets gathered to discuss the future of their collective security. Ylira was seated at the head of the table, her posture regal, her every word measured and deliberate. Ethan, as part of the human delegation, was positioned nearby, observing the proceedings. When the conversation turned to human involvement in galactic affairs, Ylira's gaze shifted toward him. Her eyes locked with his, and for a moment, it felt as though time had stopped. Ethan's heart skipped a beat, a feeling he couldn't quite explain. She wasn't just looking at him. As a diplomat, it felt personal, as though she were sizing him up. Captain Ethan Drake, Ylira said, her voice clear and confident. You represent Earth with such passion. Tell me, how do humans plan to contribute to the peace of the galaxy? Ethan stood straighter, surprised by the directness of the question. We plan to contribute by offering our support, our technology, and our expertise in combat strategy, he replied, choosing his words carefully. We believe that a united galaxy is a stronger galaxy. Ylira raised an eyebrow, intrigued by his answer. United, yes, but at what cost? She asked, her voice carrying an edge. What is the cost of peace, Captain? Ethan hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to respond. He wasn't used to this level of scrutiny, but something about her challenge stirred something inside him. "It's the cost of sacrifice," he said, meeting her gaze. "We're willing to make difficult choices if it means a safer future for everyone." The princess regarded him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, without breaking eye contact, she gave a small nod. "Perhaps we will see if your actions match your words, Captain Drake." The conversation ended, but the tension between them lingered. As Ethan left the meeting, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just crossed paths with someone far more complex than he had anticipated. There was something about Ylira, something beyond her beauty, beyond her intelligence, that drew him in. Over the next few weeks, Ethan found himself encountering Ylira more frequently. Their meetings were usually brief and centered around the ongoing negotiations, but there were moments, glances shared across crowded rooms, brief conversations between sessions that made Ethan's pulse race. He had heard rumors about the princess's unyielding nature, how she was fiercely dedicated to her people and would never let personal feelings interfere with her duty. Yet every time they spoke, there was a spark of something more between them. One evening, after a particularly tense diplomatic dinner, Ethan found himself wandering the palace gardens alone. The stars above shone brightly, their light reflecting off the shimmering fountains and lush alien plants. He was lost in thought, wondering how the negotiations were progressing when a soft voice interrupted his reverie. "You're far from the others, Captain." Ethan turned to see Ylira standing by a stone bench, her silhouette framed by the moonlight. Her hair caught the light, and for a moment she seemed to glow, ethereal and distant. He hadn't expected to see her here, away from the formality of the palace halls. "I needed a moment to clear my head," Ethan replied, trying to sound casual. He wasn't sure why, but being near her made him feel both at ease and on edge. Ylira smiled, a small, knowing smile. "I understand. This place can be overwhelming at times." Ethan stepped closer, drawn to her like a magnet. "I've heard that your people are known for their wisdom. How do you manage the pressure?" Her smile faded slightly, and her expression became thoughtful. "It is not easy," she said, "but it is necessary. My people need a strong leader, and I must be that leader, even if it means sacrificing my own desires." Ethan felt a pang of sympathy. He understood what it meant to put duty above everything else. But for the first time, he wondered, what did Ylira truly desire? Was she just a princess bound by her responsibilities, or was there more to her than what the world saw? Before he could ask, she spoke again, her voice softer now. "You've been a good ally to us, Captain. Your words have meaning, but actions speak louder." Ethan couldn't help but wonder if she was referring to their previous conversation. He could feel the weight of her words hanging in the air, as if she were inviting him to prove himself, not just as a diplomat, but as someone who could see beyond the surface. As they stood together in the garden, neither of them spoke for a long while. It was as though the stars themselves were watching, waiting for the next step to be taken. Finally, as the night grew colder, Ylira turned to leave. But before she did, she paused, looking over her shoulder at Ethan. "There is much we can learn from each other, Captain," she said, her voice carrying a hint of something deeper, something more personal. "Perhaps one day we will." And with that, she vanished into the night, leaving Ethan standing in the garden, his mind racing with questions. What did she mean by that? Was it a challenge? Or was there something more to this growing connection between them? As he stood there gazing at the stars, one thing became clear to him. The story between him and Princess Ylira was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. The days following Ethan's meeting with Princess Ylira had been filled with confusion and uncertainty. It wasn't that the mission was going badly, but the personal feelings that had begun to grow between him and Ylera made everything feel more complicated. His role as a soldier, the eyes of his superiors, and the pressure of keeping things professional weighed heavily on his mind. But even so, Ethan couldn't ignore the growing connection he felt every time Ylera crossed his path. Their conversations had been brief but meaningful, always ending with a lingering sense of something unspoken. Despite the cold, formal nature of their diplomatic meetings, every encounter with her left Ethan with more questions than answers. He had been preparing for another day of tense talks when a message arrived, summoning him to the royal palace. As soon as he entered the grand hall, he knew something was different. The atmosphere was heavy, the usual hum of conversation replaced with a tense silence. "Captain Drake," one of the palace attendants called out, leading him down a series of hallways to a private room. Ethan's mind raced with possibilities, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something unusual was about to unfold. The door opened, and Ethan stepped inside. To his surprise, Princess Ylera was already there, sitting by the window, gazing out at the alien city beyond. There was a quiet strength in her posture, but Ethan could tell something was wrong. She turned to face him as he entered, her expression unreadable. "You asked to see me, Princess?" Ethan said, trying to keep his voice steady. He had learned to read Ylera's body language, and today she seemed distant, more distant than usual. Ylera nodded, gesturing for him to take a seat. She was wearing her formal robes, the same ones she had worn during their official meetings. But there was something different about her today. Her eyes held a weight that hadn't been there before. "I wanted to speak to you privately, Captain," she said, her voice calm but tense. "There's something important I need to tell you." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He had no idea what could be so urgent. "Of course. What's going on?" Ylera hesitated for a moment, her fingers gently tapping the edge of the table. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, more personal. "I'm pregnant, Captain," she said, looking up at him with eyes that seemed to hold both vulnerability and determination. "And the child is yours." For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Ethan couldn't believe what he had just heard. His mind raced, trying to process the words. Ylera, the powerful and composed princess of the Xerath, was pregnant. And it was his child? It was impossible. He had been with her only once, and it had been a fleeting moment. How could this be? "Princess, I don't understand," Ethan stammered, his voice rising in disbelief. "How could this happen? We only—" "I know," Ylera interrupted gently. "I know how it sounds. But the Xerath people have a unique way of reproducing. It's not like the humans. Our biology is complex, and only certain connections can result in offspring. It's rare, Captain, but it's not impossible. And you were the one who triggered it." Ethan sat back, still trying to wrap his mind around it. He couldn't deny the feelings he had for Ylera. He had felt them growing ever since their first meeting, but he never imagined it would lead to something like this, Ylera continued, her voice steady, but her eyes betraying a hint of worry. "It's not just about us. This child, this union, has the potential to change everything. The Xerath people do not take such matters lightly. They will not accept this easily. My father, the king, will likely see this as a threat to our culture, to our way of life." Ethan felt a knot form in his stomach. He had known the Xerath were powerful, but he hadn't realized how much weight their traditions held. The thought of a human child in the royal bloodline would likely cause an uproar. Ylera's father, King Zorath, was a man of tradition, and he would never allow something that challenged the purity of his people. "But why tell me now?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why not before? Why wait until now?" Ylera's eyes softened, and she stood up, walking over to the window. She didn't look at him as she spoke, but her voice was filled with raw honesty. "I didn't know how to tell you," she admitted. "I didn't know what you would say. I was afraid you would think it was a mistake, that you would want nothing to do with it. But it's not just a mistake, Captain. This child, it is a symbol of our bond, our connection, and our future. And I want you to be part of that future." Ethan stood up and walked toward her, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't even known it was possible. And yet here she was, asking him to be a part of something far bigger than himself. "Ylira, I don't know what to say," he said, his voice heavy with uncertainty. "I never thought this could happen. I never thought I'd be in this situation." Ylira turned to face him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of understanding. "I'm not asking you to have all the answers, Captain. I'm not asking you to be perfect, but I am asking you to make a choice for the child, for us, for the future." Ethan took a deep breath, trying to steady his thoughts. He had always been someone who believed in duty, in doing what was expected of him. But this was something different. It wasn't a mission he could walk away from. It wasn't a decision made by orders. It was a decision made by his heart. "I don't know what the future holds, Ylira," he said, his voice filled with a quiet determination. "But I do know this. I'm not going to walk away. I'll stand by you. I'll stand by our child." Ylira's eyes filled with relief, and for the first time since their conversation had begun, a genuine smile spread across her face. It wasn't the controlled, diplomatic smile she often wore. It was a smile of someone who had just been freed from a heavy burden. "You don't know how much that means to me, Captain," she whispered. "To have you here. To know that I'm not alone in this." Ethan stepped closer to her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. He wasn't going to let Ylira face it alone. He had made his choice. But as the two of them stood there in the quiet of the royal palace, Ethan knew that the path ahead would not be easy. There were forces at play, both political and personal, that would make their journey complicated. The Xirith royal court would never accept this union without resistance. There would be opposition, challenges, and perhaps even danger. Yet for the first time, Ethan felt as though he wasn't just a soldier following orders. He was a man standing. Beside someone who had become more than just a leader, she had become someone he cared for deeply. And for her and for their child, he was ready to face whatever came next. As Ylira looked up at him, her eyes filled with both hope and fear, Ethan realized that this was only the beginning. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Their story was far from over, and whatever the Xirith and the galaxy had in store for them, they would face it together. The days that followed the revelation were filled with uncertainty and fear. Ethan had promised Ylira that he would stand by her, that he would be there for the child they were about to have. But as the news of their union spread through the palace, it became clear that the road ahead would be anything but easy. From the moment the Xirith royal court heard about Ylira's pregnancy, the atmosphere in the palace shifted. Whispers filled the air, and there were glances exchanged between officials, soldiers, and even the servants. The child of a human and a Xirith princess, something so rare, so unheard of, was bound to create a stir. Ethan had always known that. The Xirith people held strong to their traditions. Their culture was ancient, and they valued purity above all else. The thought of a hybrid child, a union between their royal bloodline and a human, was something that could shake the very foundation of their society. Ylira was no fool. She knew the backlash was coming. Her father, King Zorath, was a man of tradition, and he would never accept this union easily. In fact, he might see it as a direct challenge to his authority, his bloodline, and everything the Xirith stood for. The first meeting with the royal court after Ylira's revelation was tense. Ethan stood beside her, his heart racing as the chamber doors opened and the court members filed in. Their faces were stern, their expressions cold as they took their seats around the massive circular table. King Zorath sat at the head of the table, his eyes narrow as he surveyed the room. When his gaze landed on Ylera and Ethan, a silence fell over the chamber. Ethan could feel the weight of the king's stare, the power and authority that radiated from him. He was not a man to be crossed. "You bring shame upon the royal bloodline." "My daughter," King Zorath said, his voice deep and commanding. "A human? You've chosen a human to bear your child?" Ylera did not flinch. She had known this would happen. Her resolve was unshakable. "I have chosen him because he is the one with whom I share a bond. This child will be our future, father. I will not back down." The tension in the room was palpable. The other members of the court exchanged uneasy glances, but none spoke. King Zorath's face remained expressionless, but Ethan could see the fury simmering just below the surface. "This child threatens everything we stand for," the king continued, his voice rising. "It is an abomination. The Zirith will never accept it." Ethan felt his anger rise, but he knew better than to speak out of turn. He was a soldier, and in the presence of royalty, he was just a guest, a foreigner. But that didn't mean he would stand idly by while Ylera's future was decided for her. He stepped forward, his voice firm. "The child is not an abomination, Your Majesty. It is a symbol of what could be. A bridge between our people. The Zirith have always been isolated, never willing to embrace anything outside their own. But this child, this union, could open doors. It could lead to understanding, cooperation, and peace between our species." Ylera's hand found his, and they stood side by side, united. But the king was not moved. "You speak of peace, human," King Zorath sneered. "But how can you speak of peace when your very presence here threatens the stability of our empire? The Zirith are an ancient race, and we have survived this long without outside influence. This child will not change that. The royal bloodline will not be tainted." "Father," Ylera said, her voice calm but resolute, "this is not just about bloodlines. It's about the future of our people. I do not want to be confined by old traditions. We must evolve. The galaxy is changing, and we must change with it." The king slammed his fist on the table, the force of it echoing through the chamber. "You are my heir. You are the future of the Zirith. And yet, you choose a human over your own people. Do not expect me to support this." Ylera's eyes flashed with determination. "Then I will do this without your support. I will raise this child and fight for what I believe is right. And if you cannot see that, then I will lead the Zirith without you." The king's face reddened with fury, but he said nothing more. The room remained silent as the tension between father and daughter thickened. Ethan could feel the weight of the moment, the importance of what was being decided. But he also knew that this was far from over. There were those in the royal court who would not let this matter rest. They would fight against Ylera's decision, and they would do everything in their power to stop her. After the meeting, the mood in the palace became even more tense. Whispers filled the halls, and there were those who openly questioned Ylera's judgment. Some of the advisors warned her to back down, to reconsider her decision before it was too late. But Ylera stood firm, unwavering in her belief that this was the right path. Ethan, too, faced challenges. The human delegation had been sent to the Zirith to establish peaceful relations. But now, he was seen as a symbol of the very thing that threatened those relations. He was the outsider, the one who had brought chaos into their world. There were murmurs of distrust and disdain whenever he walked the halls of the palace. But Ylera's presence was a constant comfort. She had become his anchor, and despite the growing opposition, he knew he couldn't walk away now. He had made a promise to her and to the child they would raise together. One night, As they walked the gardens of the palace, away from the watchful eyes of the court, Ylera spoke of her fears. "I didn't want it to be like this," she said softly, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. "I never imagined it would be so difficult. I thought my people would see the value in our union, but now I don't know what to do." Ethan stopped and turned to face her, gently cupping her face in his hands. "You don't have to do this alone, Ylera. We'll face this together, I promise you." She smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. "I never thought I would find someone like you, someone who would fight for me, for us. But I am afraid of what will happen to us, to the child." Ethan's heart ached for her. He could see the weight she carried, the burden of leadership, of tradition, and of her own people's expectations. But he also saw the strength within her, the same strength that had made her stand up to her father, to the king in front of the royal court. "You are not alone," he repeated. "We are stronger together, Ylera, and I will never leave you." As they stood there under the vast alien sky, a sense of peace settled between them. The future was uncertain, and there was no denying that their path was fraught with challenges. But in that moment, it didn't matter. They had made their choice, and they would face whatever came next together. Little did they know that the real challenge was yet to come. The Xerath royal court was not going to back down so easily. The whispers and rumors would grow louder, and those who opposed Ylera's decision would stop at nothing to tear them apart. But the bond they shared was unbreakable, and nothing would stand in their way, not even the vast, unyielding power of the Xerath Empire. As Ylera leaned into Ethan's embrace, they both knew that the journey ahead would be difficult, but they were ready for it. They were ready to fight for their love, for their future, and for the child they would raise together. And together, they would face whatever came next. The days following the intense royal court meeting were filled with a strange mixture of fear and hope. The Xerath royal palace had become a place of whispered rumors and hidden glares. The royal court was divided. Some supported Ylera, while others, especially those who aligned closely with King Zorath, viewed her union with a human as a betrayal to their people and traditions. Ethan, standing by her side, knew that the fight wasn't over yet. This wasn't just about a child. It was about changing centuries of tradition, and that would take more than words. Despite the tension, Ylera was resolute. She spent her days meeting with diplomats and court members who supported her cause. Ethan, by her side, tried to offer whatever support he could, whether it was in the form of strategy or simply listening when Ylera needed to talk. He had never felt more out of place in his life, but for her, he would endure it all. She was strong, and she needed him to be strong, too. It had been weeks since the royal court's confrontation. The royal palace's halls, once full of whispers of rebellion, had quieted. But Ethan could feel the storm that was coming. The king had not given up on his opposition to Ylera's pregnancy. His anger had not died down, and his advisors were still trying to find a way to distance the princess from the human soldier. There were talks of an arranged marriage to another Xerath noble, one who could offer Ylera more appropriate support. But Ylera wouldn't back down. She would never let anyone force her into a life she didn't choose. Ethan could see the toll this was taking on her. Her shoulders were heavy with the burden of her decisions. As much as she tried to maintain a strong front, he knew that every day was a battle for her. She was not just fighting for their love, but for a new future for her people. A future that would require change, and change was never easy. One evening, after a long day of meetings and negotiations, Ylera and Ethan found themselves alone in the royal gardens. The vast expanse of lush greenery surrounded them, the air thick with the scent of alien flowers. The stars above shone brightly, and the soft hum of the palace's energy field buzzed in the distance. It was peaceful, a moment of calm before the storm. "I'm tired, Ethan," Ylera said, her voice barely above a whisper. She sat on a stone bench, her gaze fixed on the stars. "I never thought it would be this difficult. I knew my people would resist, but I didn't realize how deep their opposition ran." Ethan walked over and sat beside her. He didn't need to say anything. He simply placed a hand on her shoulder, offering her the comfort of his presence. He understood what she was feeling. He too had been battling the doubts and fears that came with their situation. "You've been fighting your whole life for your people, Ylera," Ethan said gently. "This is just another battle, and you're not alone in it." Ylera turned her head to look at him. "I'm scared, Ethan. What if I fail? What if I can't change things for them? For our child?" Ethan smiled softly, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "You won't fail. You're stronger than you think, and you have me, and we have each other." For a moment, the weight of the world seemed to lift from Ylera's shoulders. She leaned into Ethan, resting her head against his chest. The quiet of the garden, the warmth of his embrace, gave her the peace she had been craving. But the peace was temporary. They both knew the fight wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. As days passed, the tension in the palace escalated. King Zorath, in his fury, had begun to take more drastic measures. He had ordered that Ylera be isolated from the royal court, claiming that her presence was a distraction and a threat to the stability of the empire. Ethan was not allowed to attend the royal meetings, and Ylera was forbidden from speaking to certain influential members of the court. It was clear that the king was trying to weaken her position, but Ylera refused to yield. Every day, she became more determined to prove that she was capable of leading her people, even without her father's approval. One evening, as Ylera prepared for another day of diplomatic meetings, Ethan found her standing alone in her chamber, staring out the window. She looked exhausted, her once strong posture now slightly slumped under the weight of the decision she had to make. "You don't have to do this alone, you know," Ethan said quietly, stepping into the room. Ylera turned to face him, her eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and determination. "I know you're here for me, Ethan, but this is something I have to do. I have to prove to my people that I am capable, that I can lead them into a new era. I can't do that if I'm constantly relying on others." Ethan walked over to her and took her hands in his. "You don't have to prove anything. You've already proven that you're more than capable, and if it means standing by you through this, then I'll stand by you. Always." Ylera's eyes softened. "But this is bigger than us, Ethan. If we succeed, it will change everything. If we fail—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "We won't fail," Ethan said, his voice filled with conviction. "We'll figure this out together, you and me. We'll make them see that this child, this union, is not a threat. It's a new beginning." Ylera took a deep breath, as if drawing strength from his words. "You're right," she said. "It's time to take the next step." The next day, Ylera called for a private meeting with the royal council. The room was filled with the most powerful individuals in the Zirith Empire, her father's closest advisors, military leaders, and influential nobles. They had all gathered, expecting to hear her latest efforts to appease the king. But Ylera had a different plan. Standing before the council, she looked around the room at the faces of those who had once been her supporters. Some still believed in her. Others, however, had already chosen to side with her father. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "The time for compromise is over," Ylera said, her voice strong and unwavering. "I will not back down. I will not let fear and tradition rule our future. The child I carry is a symbol of a new era for the Zirith people, a time of unity, understanding, and change. And I will lead this empire into that future, whether you choose to follow me or not." The room fell silent. Ethan stood by her side, his presence a silent declaration of his support. Ylera didn't falter. She continued, her eyes locked with those of the council members. This is not about human and Xereth. This is about what we can accomplish together. The galaxy is changing, and we must change with it. We cannot remain isolated in the past. We must evolve. And if that means stepping away from the traditions that have held us back, then so be it. For what seemed like an eternity, there was silence. Then, one by one, several members of the council began to speak. Some voiced their concerns, others questioned her vision. But there was a shift. There was an acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, Ylera was right. That maybe it was time to embrace change. As the meeting came to a close, Ylera had not won the council over completely, but she had planted a seed. There was a glimmer of hope that her vision could become a reality. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, Ylera felt as though she was no longer alone in the fight. Later that evening, as Ylera and Ethan stood together in the gardens, watching the stars above, she turned to him with a quiet smile. "We've taken the first step, Ethan. It's just the beginning." Ethan smiled back, his hand resting on hers. "And we'll take every step together." The future was still uncertain, and there were many challenges ahead. But Ylera knew in that moment that no matter what happened, she was ready to face. With Ethan by her side, and the hope of a new beginning in her heart, she knew they could build a better future for themselves, for their child, and for the Xereth people.